Good morning. This is Dr. Jamie Ferrer from Better with Physical Therapy. And today we are talking about mobility for runners. So, this is our Unlock Your Stride talk. We're currently in the Better with PT facility, and we'll get going here. If you have any questions, throw them into the chat, and be happy to answer them as we move along here. The big topics that we're going to cover today. So the big things that I want you to walk away from today with a good understanding of is going to be why mobility matters for runners. What are some common tight areas that we see people complain about a lot? What are the biggest mistakes that people make when they're trying to improve their mobility? And how do we better identify our limitations rather than just thinking, oh, my back feels tight, so my back must be tight. Sometimes there could be other areas that are influencing that. And then once we've done that, how do we actually fix or improve our mobility limitations or deficits? Why mobility matters? So, when you're running, you tend to be in a pretty linear plane. You get a little bit of rotation. And if you really think about it, you're not getting to extreme end ranges of any specific thing, right? It's not like you're going into a maximum rotation when you run or a maximum bending down or extension or anything like that. But during the course of a mile, the average steps that people take is 1,500 steps. So even the smallest mobility restriction, stopping you from rotating a little bit, can influence you a very significant amount because that's just going to compound over time. And so if you think about people that are training for marathons, that are doing, some of their long runs upwards of 20 miles on a given Sunday, that's, times that by 1,500. And over the course of, miles and miles and miles, weeks after weeks, the restriction that you have can just continue to compound and make things feel more and more stiff or feel more painful. Mobility, or the having good mobility, can improve your running economy. It can reduce the injury risk, and it can actually allow for better force production too. So if you're unable to really rotate into a hip, then you may not be able to push off and use the glute as well as you may need to or may want to during something like running. Think especially during some of your harder kicks or when you're picking up the pace on thresholds or running hills. The glute is doing a huge job to propel you forward and provide force production forward to propel you. And if we can't actually get into the hip well, then we're not going to have that same push off to produce a good stride in the right direction. Obviously, reducing injury risk over those 1,500 steps that you take per mile. You could have 1,500 really good reps, or you could have 1,500 really bad reps. Again, with the idea of things just compounding over time, if you have really bad reps and you're doing that for miles and miles and miles, eventually things are going to start nagging and start becoming painful. One of the big questions we get a lot of times is, I don't have any problems when I'm running currently. Is it still worth getting a assessment to see how I run? And we're big believers that yes, get a running assessment, get a strength assessment, get a mobility assessment. And the reason for that is, okay, if you're training for a 5K right now, it may be okay. It's still within the threshold of what your body is capable of compensating for or modifying for. But if we double that and push for a 10K, now that increased compounded steps, does that lead to the issue finally coming to light? So even if you're feeling okay, it can still be beneficial to check in with those things because it can help reduce the injury risk down the line as you start to push for new events or even new paces, because volume is one thing, but pushing the intensity can have a similar effect. Common tight areas that we see in runners, and again, this is somewhat anecdotal from what we've seen in our clinic, but a lot of times people will complain about Ankles feeling tight or their calves feeling tight is more so how they would complain about it. Um, we also see this even up the chain. So maybe they're not necessarily complaining about calf tightness or ankle tight being tight or stiff, but they'll complain about knee pains or hip pains. And when we really dive deeper into it, the problem presents itself down at the level of the hip. Sorry, at the level of the ankle. So it's important that we check these things and kind of check the box, because if we didn't assess that to begin with, we would have just been targeting the hip the entire time. But in reality, it's like there's more to the story. So the ankles, the biggest motion is what's called dorsiflexion. So that's if you try to lift your toes up towards you. If you struggle to do that, or if it feels stiff going in that direction, that's probably the biggest area that we see a problem for the ankles. The hips is another big one, especially for runners. They'll complain a lot about their hip flexors feeling tight. They a lot of times will even point to this like outside of the hip, almost like the TFL muscle. It functions as a little bit of an internal rotator, and even some of your like glute muscles that they complain about feeling tight. But they can also have things like your glutes, and sometimes people come in, they complain about this like low back pain, and in reality it's their glutes. It's still low enough that it's within the realm of their glute muscles all the way up to the top of the pelvis, but they perceive it as back pain, and in reality it's just the hip potentially being stiff or being tight. Hamstrings, I labeled it the scapegoat. Everyone thinks they have tight hamstrings, but not everyone has tight hamstrings. A lot of times people with tight hamstrings are just, it's thrown down as the scapegoat, but in reality it's because the back is not moving as well, or the coordination through the abs and the pelvis and the glutes isn't where it should be, so the hamstrings end up locking up and doing a lot more of the heavy lifting. And again, they get they get thrown in as they get thrown the blame on top of them, and in reality they're tightening up because they're trying to do someone else's job. They're trying to make up for the fact that someone else is tight, or someone else is just not carrying the load that they're supposed to. With that said, some people do have tight hamstrings, and so we'll show you today how to assess for that. The spine is another big one, so ability to rotate. Again, during running, you get this little bit of rotation that occurs during each step, and usually that helps to counterbalance, but also helps to propel you forward a little bit. The other area is the lower back or lumbar stiffness, and sometimes that presents itself more as people start to either increase volume or increase intensity. Either one, they'll feel that, okay, I did a interval session today and my low back just feels really, really tight. Or I did a long run today and my low back felt tight afterwards. And usually it's just like as things fatigue, they start to feel it in this lower back area. And so we'll show you how to assess for that too. So understanding your limitations, I'd like the goal for this session to just kind of break down piece by piece of how to see if what you think is tight is actually tight, or what you think is stiff is actually stiff. The first movement that you would do is a toe touch. So this here is really looking at two different variables, and that's when we're going to break it down and see which one is the actual problem. So the toe touch can be broken down into a leg lift or think of it like a child's pose. So when you start with the toe touch, if you can reach all the way down, you can keep your knees and toes completely straight, toes facing forward, and there's a nice uniform curve throughout the spine while touching the toes or the floor, and you can keep the heels on the ground. You've successfully completed it, and there's no need to go into the breakout. You've kind of proven, okay, I've got that down pat, I'm good, I don't need to break it down. This area is actually kind of cleared. With that said, if there's pain, that kind of knocks you some points. So if there's any pain with this, then actually you would still want to check out the breakout to see if there's a reason as to why you're running into that pain problem with one of these two movements. Maybe it's, maybe the leg lift is not as good, and so the child's pose is having to do more. So the hamstring is tight, and you're having to compensate it through your back. So maybe that's why you feel more tightness in the back, for example. The breakouts. So if you take the first one here on the left with the straight leg lift, the goal should be that the ankle of the leg you're lifting. So let's say you're looking at the right side. Uh, the right ankle should come past the left knee. So you can clearly see on this guy's left knee is almost in line with the arrow, and the ankle has definitely gone past that level coming up. So the uh, gets a passing score for that movement. This is more so looking at your hamstring length. And so if you were considering, okay, I can't do the toe touch, I can't touch the floor. Now it's okay, can we see if it's more of a hamstring problem or a low back problem? And you've successfully done the straight leg lift. Okay, we could kind of rule out the hamstring. Let's check out the low back. So then we would go into this child's pose position. You should be able to get your butt to touch your heels without lifting your elbows off the floor. So you can see she's clearly maintained a nice solid position there. Butt is all the way back to her heels. Her elbows are flat on the floor. She's able to keep her head down. Um, and she passes the test. Now, if you can't do that, then that starts to tell us that maybe there's some stiffness in the lower back that's not letting you get this flexion pattern or this curvature in the low back. The next thing we want to look at is the back's ability to bend and the hip's ability to extend. So similar to the toe touch, we want to see a nice uniform curvature through the spine. So, if you're looking at this yourself, it may be hard to do, but maybe you could get into a mirror, maybe you could get a friend or a spouse to look at it and see if they could see anything, or go to your PT or even personal trainer if you're working with a run specific trainer. The other thing is you want to see that the ASIS is beyond the toes. So ASIS is just this bony landmark. Think of it as the very front of your hip. If it's going all the way past the front of the toes, you've got another check mark. And the last thing is that the shoulder blades are going past the hips on the backside, which if you look at this lady at the top here, she's clearly doing that perfectly. Shoulder blades are past the heels. Um, and then the front of her hip is past the toes, and then she's got a nice curvature through her entire spine. Now, if we can't do this, again, if you can, check it off the box. You've passed it, you're good. Let's move on to something else. But if you can't, then we got to break it down. Is it a hip problem that the hip can't extend and it can't go forward? Or is it a low back problem that it can't curve into extension? So as we look at this, if we go into the first one with the leg lift, you want to be able to lift the knee at an angle of 10 degrees off of the floor. It's predominantly looking at, can you actually extend through your hip flexor? Can you lengthen your hip flexor? At the same time, if it's done actively the way this guy is doing it, where you're actively lifting the leg off, someone's not doing it for you, it's going to assess your glute and hamstring ability to fire. You should feel the glutes activate first, and then you should be able to lift the hip 10 degrees off the floor while keeping the knee straight. If you can't, again, cues us in likely a glute or hip flexor problem, more of a hip dominant issue that's not letting you get into that back bend. If we pass that and we move on to the low back extension test, which is just a press up from the floor, you should be able to keep the hips on the floor and get the elbows completely straight. If you can't do that, then you're dealing with more of a low back stiffness. The reality is you should be doing all of these. So even if we go back to the toe touch, we should be doing the leg lift test as well as the child's pose test. Just because you failed or passed one doesn't mean that you could kind of write off the other one. Sometimes you could have a little bit of both issues going on, and so we would want to check that out for sure. Same thing here. Maybe you have a hip extension issue, but you also have a low back issue with extension. So let's check them both out. As we go into rotation, again, there's not a whole lot of rotation that happens during running, but there is this little bit that happens every single step. So we do want to make sure we can do this activity as it'll compound over time. So the starting position, the initial test position, is just going to be standing, feet completely together. When you rotate, you should be able to see your front shoulder from the back side, right? So even if I turned around, and I kind of do this for you guys here, feet all the way together, and I turn around, you should be able to see this front shoulder pop all the way out from the back side. Same thing if I rotate this way, you should be able to see my left shoulder now pop out from the back side, even without moving your feet. If not, then we have to assess, is it a rotation in the back or is it a hip rotation problem? And that's where these next two breakouts come in. So first piece is going to be starting in a quadruped position or hands and knees position. You're going to get hand on the back of your head or on the back of your neck. And then the goal is going to be, can you rotate through your spine? And so being on your knees like this kind of takes the hip and pelvis out of it, and it lets you focus on the rotation through the mid-back. The goal would be to get about 45 degrees. So picture your 90-degree angle. You want to be somewhere right in the middle of that with how far you can rotate your arm to, and that'll be your gauge. This should be achieved without like overly arching or bending the back in another plane. Other tests to check for the hip is just going to be starting face down. Can you actually rotate and drop your foot from one side to the other? Ideally achieving at least 30 degrees to either direction. And if you can't, then you've got a problem, right? So just to give an example here, if I was laying completely flat and picture this my knee, this is my foot here, and you rotate that down, if I can only get this, call that about 10, 15 degrees, then my hip's not moving nearly as well as it should. But if I could get it to drop all the way down here, then okay, we've kind of checked that box. We're beyond that 30-degree mark. We're good to go. Really, we're looking at, is there a limitation in internal rotation, external rotation? So if you're laying down, your right foot is up, and you drop your right foot outwards towards the right side, that's going to be more of an internal rotation. Even though it's out direction, it's internal rotation at the hip. And then just the opposite, if you drop the foot in towards your other knee, it's going to be an external rotation movement, even though you're dropping your foot in. But whichever direction is more limited, that can cue you into which direction you need to work on more. The squat movement pattern is another good one to assess a little bit of everything, honestly, but the bigger focus points here are going to be the hips and low back versus the ankle. So again, when we talked about the ankle before, a lot of people come in complaining about a hip problem or a back problem or a knee problem, and then we assess the squat pattern, and actually it's like their ankles just don't move nearly as well as they should. But this will tell you how to figure that out. So if we start with the squat, we're in this feet about hip width apart. Heels should stay on the floor, so don't lift up onto your toes. And then you should be able to achieve this like 90-degree angle at the knees at the very least. And your key one that a lot of people forget about is your trunk should be parallel to your shins. So if you draw a line on this example here, you could follow the purplish top that this lady in the image is wearing, line it with the shins, and you can see a pretty nice parallel line on either one. If your shins are perfectly upright, but your torso is dropping in like that, then you're not parallel anymore, and you've actually failed this test. So to give you an example of that, I'll kind of demo it right here. If you're dropping into your squat, and shins are upright, but you're all the way here, you're not successfully doing that squat, even though it might feel like you're getting low enough. The breakouts for this are going to be basically like knees to chest. So give yourself a big hug, pull your knees into your chest. The markers that you're looking for is that your shins remain parallel to the ground, so they should be basically straight across, and your knees stay within your shoulder width. So if you could bring your knees way up, but they kick out to the side beyond the width of your shoulders, then you don't actually have the hip flexion necessary or the lumbar or low back flexion to do this exercise, and you're compensating by flaring the knees out. The ankle test that you're seeing here is going to be a like half kneeling. Can we just move the knee forward? The goal is going to be that the knee passes the toes, and it should be greater than the width of one hand. So if you picture hand here, you could use this as your marker. A lot of times what we do is we'll have someone go up to a wall, put this side of the hand up against the wall, and then put their toes right over here. And then they'll be kneeling down, and then just can we drive the knee past that point. And if they could hit the wall, you've got at least enough there. But the idea is, again, heels must stay on the ground. If you're lifting up, you're compensating by cheating and lifting the heel up a little bit there. This is a little bonus one, a little less mobility related, but I think it's just an important point to touch on. It's just overall single leg stability. I think we sometimes forget that running is a essentially completely single leg activity, and those 1,500 steps are just going from one leg pushing off onto the other leg. And so if you're struggling to be stable and balanced in that position, a lot of times it can make running a lot harder than it should be. You're going to have to compensate, and you're going to have to produce force elsewhere as you're trying to make up for this lack of stability that should just be pushing you straight forward to have the most speed and the most efficiency. The goal here is that you should be able to at least maintain this position for at least 10 seconds. I think that's even a little on the low side, but I think that's a very low barrier level. If you can't do that, then you definitely have some work to do. If you're able to do 30 seconds to a minute, then you're in pretty good shape. If there is a problem here, the next step to look at would be, can you just hold half kneeling? So get one knee down, get the foot in front of the knee, and then can you hold that like a tightrope? And that's more so to look at your stability through your hip on the knee that's down, or you would dive deeper into some foot assessment thing. So some of you guys might have heard of toe yoga, where can we look at how well we could lift the big toe off the floor versus lift the other toes off the floor? Can we control them? So on and so forth, as well as even just big toe mobility, all this good stuff. I think that's probably a good talk for another day. There's a lot to dive into that with that. So we could keep that in mind and potentially do something on that down the road. But the big picture is, if there's a limitation in any of those things, again, it's going to make you deviate how well you can push the force. And so if there's a lack of stability and you're going more side to side than you should be, you're going to be missing out on potential speed or potential efficiency running in a straight line. And with that comes more compensatory movement that makes you have to rely on other structures that maybe aren't equipped to do that. And that's when problems come up. So how to fix the mobility. The beauty of it is you have all the tools just in those things that we covered. So even as we look back here, if we go all the way to the toe touch, if you couldn't do this leg lift, again, or let's say you couldn't do the toe touch, you went down to the breakouts and you couldn't do the leg lift, then that's telling us it's more of a hamstring lengthening problem, right? So we can't get the leg all the way up there. We're not able to coordinate that movement. So we need to do more of this. So a simple thing would be, can we get a strap and help us to get into that position? And we could work a little bit of a stretch in that position and just hold the stretch. The back bend, the child's pose position here in itself could be an exercise. So if you can't quite get into that position all the way, keeping the elbows down, getting the butt all the way to your heels, then you're going to have to work on owning that position and coordinating that through your low back. So the exercise here would literally be to do that, but can we, each time we go into the movement, think about rounding the low back a little bit more, sink into our hips a little bit, and the goal would be to just do this multiple times. I think, as we'll touch on in a little bit, some of the problems is that people just underdose how much they should be doing, which we'll talk about in a second. But the toe touch can get broken down into those two, and then you have your two exercises just based off of what your limitation is. Same thing with the back bend. If you weren't able to do it and you've broken down into these two movements, if you've determined it was a hip extension problem where you couldn't lift the leg up, then we have to specifically work on that. So you're going to turn that right into an exercise where your goal is going to be, can I squeeze my glute and lift that leg straight off the floor? Even if I only get 1 to 2 inches off, that's fine, and we're going to work to progress all the way up to like a 10-degree lift off. With the uh, press ups, similar idea where, okay, I can't quite straighten my elbows all the way out if I'm trying to keep my hips down, or if I get my elbows all the way straight, my hips to come up, then I'm going to say we have to work on this. Maybe we just work at the range that the hips don't lift up. And if it means my elbow is a little bit bent, then that's okay. But I'm going to work on just sinking into that position, incorporating some breathing into it to get the low back muscles and joints to all relax. And that'll let me sink into the movement a little bit more. Similar idea with the rotation. So couldn't get 45 degrees with the quadruped or hand and knee rotation. So that's telling me my mid back is a little bit stiff. It's not letting me rotate. I'm going to sink right into that position. And I'm going to do quite a few reps there, incorporated with some breathing to help me open everything up. Same goes for the hip rotation here. I could stay laying flat. I was limited in dropping my foot in towards the back of my other knee. I'm going to actively work on, can I like squeeze my glute? Can I try to push that hip down or push that leg down into my other knee and try to really push it down? Or same thing, going the opposite way. With the squat, I think it's difficult for people to try to force themselves to squat lower if they're not supported, but you can go into your breakouts. So if you're struggling to really get both knees up, then we're going to have to start working in the same position of pulling the knee up. You may have to start with one leg at a time and just try to keep it straight without pushing it out to the side, bring it all the way up, and eventually work your way up to the two legs that you curl in towards your chest, keeping the shins parallel again without knees just flaring way out. If it's an ankle thing, again, I would turn this right into an exercise. Most of these, with the exception of the hamstring stretch, I would work on with the exception of the hamstring stretch, I would work on more repeated, multiple reps. So think with this ankle mobility one, for example, you're in that half kneeling, you have the hands width away from the wall, and you're keeping your heel down as you try to mobilize the ankle forward and push the knee forward. The rep range is going to be like 15 slow controlled reps, trying to push into it, working on the breathing pattern as you're doing that. And the same thing would go for this knee to chest. Same thing would go for the hip rotation or the low mid back rotation. Really, the only one that's an exception is if you're doing a specific stretch. I would try to hold that for quite a bit longer, like 2 minutes. Again, the single leg stability, a little bit of a bonus. If you're struggling with that, you can work on the half kneeling, or we would have to do a much more in-depth foot assessment, which again, we could set up another time to talk about those things. The other considerations, and even, couple of mistakes that people make quite a bit. So I'll start with the mistakes, and I think a lot of it comes down to underdosing. So if you think about a stretch, most people say they stretch every day or they stretch before every single run. And the reality is they bend down to stretch their hamstrings for a little bit, and they do 10 seconds, they move on, they pull their foot up, they do a little quad stretch for 10 seconds, and then they go out the door and start running. One of the biggest things we've noticed that we see in our day-to-day is the difference is if we are actively trying to stretch something, we're going to sit there and hold it for a lot longer. If we're doing our own like soft tissue mobilization to loosen things up, we're usually doing that for 5, 10, 15 minutes. And people are doing that for 2 minutes with their massage gun, if that. So underdosage is a huge problem. And the other part is doing the wrong thing, right? So if we think about that toe touch, they can't touch the floor. They think their hamstrings are tight, or they feel it in their hamstrings, so they just assume their hamstrings are the problem and that their hamstrings are tight. But as we saw with the breakout, it could be a hamstring lengthening problem, or it could be that your low back's not going. And so you just forcing that hamstring stretch, you're actually just working the wrong thing. And you may even be doing yourself a disservice where you're lengthening your hamstrings, and they're already longer than they need to be. They actually need to be stronger to let your low back actually round out and bend a little bit better. So I'd say those are the two big mistakes that people make that we see on a day-to-day. That I think with small modifications or small changes, you can actually see a huge turnaround in your performance and your just overall ability to recover or to do more without running into the wall of injuries. Other big considerations outside of mobility, and these will all be talks that we can harp into more in the future, but strength training is huge. Uh, any of you guys that follow a lot of the high level, elite level athletes out there, I'm thinking Connor Mance for the U.S. marathon runner, or even was his partner at the last Olympics, Clayton Young. They're working day in and day out with strength coaches to tailor their strength specific workouts around their running program. And a lot of times are working directly with their run coaches to program those things. The reality is the stronger we are, the more resilient we are. And so your body will be that much more capable of withstanding the demand that we throw at it, whether it's a 20-mile long run or a 6-mile threshold run. So having the strength to actually do it and have the force output that's required for those things will make us that much more resilient. If we think about what this guy looks like in the squat with 405 pounds, give or take, as long as we're seeing all the weights on there, he's in a really good deep squat. So, he's got a lot of mobility, and it's a lot of loaded mobility at that too. So, picture if we take the weight away, he'll be able to do that body weight squat with no problems. Next thing, that middle image is literally just someone running. And the reality is I think we underestimate what mileage over time can do. And so just being smart about how you progress your mileage. I don't think it really matters if you're running 10 miles a week or 100 miles a week. The reality is it's just, are you equipped to do that yet? If you've never run 10 miles, you sure shouldn't be running 100 miles this week. So if you ramp up slowly, we got to talk about a very smart progression through your mileage to make it safe and progress at a rate that is both, pushing the boundaries a little bit to see some progress, but not overdoing it where you're just going to be running into injuries every single time. The more general rule that has been thrown out there 1,000,001 times is to do 10% per week. The reality is that rule is kind of like, the math on it just kind of sucks. If you think about okay, I'm running 10 miles this week. If you bump it up by 10%, you're only doing 11 miles next week. So your body could withstand more than that typically. A better equation that has been out in some of the literature is that if you take the average of the last 4 weeks and put it into the ratio of what you're planning to run next week, if you're in a less than 1 or up to 1.1, you're at a lower risk of injury. Above a 1.1 to 1.3, it's more of a moderate risk, and anything above a 1.3 is going to be significantly higher risk of re-injury. So the whole idea with that is just be mindful of your mileage. And obviously injury is never something that you can fully predict, but if you can decrease your risk factor by being stronger, being mobile, monitoring your mileage, why not? It's just going to make you able to do this thing for a whole lot longer and stay healthier for a whole lot longer. Last piece here, obviously she's got the nice fancy Normatec compression boots, which feel great if you've never had them on before, but the big picture with this is just recovery. So there's a lot of things that come into recovery. Obviously, giving yourself a rest day when needed, modifying when you're not feeling up to it, whether it's physical ailments that are, maybe I feel a little tighter today, or I feel weaker today, or something hurts today, modifying in that sense. But also if you're sick, a lot of times people will try to stick to the plan without missing it at all. And the reality is if you're sick, your force output's not going to be as good. Your performance is just not going to be as good. And so that actually sets you up for a higher injury risk. With that, same thing as sleep. Nowadays there's 1,000,001 sleep trackers, Garmin watches, Apple Watch, Whoop bands, Oura rings, you name it. And while I think sometimes we get too caught up in the data and information, it is pretty helpful to track that stuff and to make sure we're doing all the right things to have good sleep and recover well, so that when you do go out for that long run, there's a huge difference if you were out, drinking and partying all night Saturday night and then step out for a run on Sunday at 6 in the morning versus you went to bed at 9 o'clock, got a good night's sleep, you woke up a little earlier, got a good breakfast in, did some mobility work or some activation work before you stepped out the door, you're setting yourself up for a lot more success in that latter example. So key takeaways, I think, big picture with something like this is you're not alone. A lot of people experience different mobility restrictions and issues with when it comes to running. There's definitely a lot of people out there, and so get involved in different community programs, whether it's talking to people at your local 5K events, 10K events, marathons, or even we have a ton of people in our own community of Better with PT that have been runners. A lot of times friends refer friends, and the door kind of stays open with those people. So being involved and getting connected with other people that are going through similar issues can help you to stay on track, keep a level head, and just realize that you're not necessarily alone in this, and there are ways to get better and to help you, right? There's PTs out there, there's trainers out there that might be more run specific to help you get to the goals that you're trying to achieve. The point number 2 is don't just stretch randomly. I think a lot of people do this. They think, again, my quad feels tight, I'm just going to stretch my quad. But sometimes stretching is actually the wrong thing, as we spoke about earlier with the hamstring. And even if you've strained a muscle, a lot of times stretching is the exact opposite of what we want to do. Even though that muscle is going to feel tight and actually will be a little tight for right now, but it's because we strained it, things tighten up to protect. If we just go and stretch, we're just kind of redoing the same injury. So, if there is an ongoing problem, make sure we get that assessed and get checked out. The other thing is don't forget about those other, potential factors, right? Strength training being one of them. It's huge. I'd say that plays a huge role in how well we can run for longer time, not just, long run wise, but just longevity wise in our day-to-day health. But sleeping, nutrition, all of that good stuff. Let's not forget about those things. I think with the strength training, I'd like to step into it with even like working with trainers. If you are currently working with a personal trainer on the strength side of things, make sure that they're coordinating with your running coach if you have one, or make sure you're talking to them about what your mileage looks like so that they can tailor their programming around that. If you're not, I highly suggest working with a strength coach or a running specific strength coach would be even better. And someone that can kind of tailor the two programs together would be awesome. The next thing is that small improvements can make huge gains, right? So like we talked about earlier, 1,500 steps per mile, things compound quite a lot over time. So the same way that could work against you if we don't address these problems, if we do, they can do the exact opposite. And if we could get stronger, we could get more mobile, we get more efficient. You'll see huge leaps and bounds of gains being made by making small improvements along the way. Again, you could have 1,500 really bad reps per mile or 1,500 really good reps that make the progress we're trying to make. Aside from that, I just want to say thank you. Thanks for tuning in. Again, Dr. Jamie Ferrer from Better with PT. If you have any questions, please feel free to reach out to us. Check us out on our website. We have a lot of options in terms of helping with programming, running assessment things. All of us here are Running Gait analysts, and we've gone through extended training to do that. So if you need to get some insight, you want to get assessed, give us a call. We can do things virtually as well. But more than that, just hope you enjoy running. Get out there, go crush it. At this point, I'm just going to check, make sure we don't have any comments coming in, which I don't think we do. So cool. I'm going to tune on out. You guys have a great day.